All
Oh,
right,
yucky.
we're live, everybody.
Hey, hey,
Sorry
hey.
we're late. It's
I'm
Mike's fault
waving
again.
behind my picture.
All right. Well, everybody knows the panel. What? Just real quickly, there's Ed beside me, and behind her picture is Pam Putchy Paints, and then Stephanie is below Ed,
Sorry.
um, Aquaria Life, and then Susie Q Aquatics is down in the corner there. And then Mike's Aquatics and Things is there. And then our special guest is Tim Arnold, the Chubby
Hey,
Guppy.
hey.
And this is part two. We have some questions and other stuff that he didn't get through. So we plan to come back. Unfortunately, some of you guys hear me say I've had a stroke and I get numbers, days, and dates and names mixed up all the time. So I said the 17th, probably looking at my little pocket calendar or on my phone, which was yesterday. So he asked me yesterday, are we going? And I'm like, no, it's Sunday. And then I looked at our chat and I had told him the 17th, okay? So it's really the 18th. So he might have publicized the 17th too. So that's my fault.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. I'm glad you reached out to me. So,
Well, I got to thinking that thought, well, I hadn't heard anything, and I thought it was strange I hadn't. I thought, I bet you it's supposed to be on Sunday.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for letting me know. So anyway, we're always on Sunday with this. So even if I say a different day or date, I'm lying.
Right on.
So welcome back, Tim, and we're glad to have you back. And we ran out of time last time, and like I said, you were starting to answer some questions, and you had some other information to present. So
Right
we'll
on.
go right into it.
All right. Well, I just noticed one thing, and I don't know. It looks like, has my camera turned sideways on my fish tank?
Yep.
That's a weird start. Okay. Uh,
Cool.
I have I have no idea why that happened. I tell you what, let me go fix that real quick before we get all started, and that way it won't bug me because I'm one of these OCD folks that will go nuts. So give me just 1 second, and we'll fix
Blame it
that.
on the
I thought you just had like a good wall built up on the back of the tank and had planted it.
No, I just got to look. I was like, that's not right. Hold on.
You can blame that on Stephanie or Mike or Ed. Ed's not taking responsibility for anything.
That's right.
That's right.
Deny, deny, deny.
I don't even do that. I just walk away.
There you go.
Sam's still stressing about timing out somebody in your stream, whoever it was. Susie.
You time somebody out?
Sam did.
Oh, nice way to go, Pam.
No, not me.
Oh,
Sam.
Grasshopper.
Sam, not
oh,
Pam.
damn.
Sam.
He's like stressing about it, but everybody does it sometimes. It's like it happens. I'll never forget when Aquamate was on a camping trip during one of my streams, and he evidently had his phone in his back pocket, and he was like banning people left and right.
Oh,
That's funny.
Hey,
At least he
Monica.
wasn't unsubbing them.
Welcome, Monica, in the stream.
oh, Monica's here. Good.
Hey, Monica. That
All
was my
right.
Australian version.
No, I don't know what was it. My camera was fine. It just StreamYard decided it was going to add 90 degrees.
Change the orientation.
There it is. I recognize those calcium stains down the back of my tank now. And I'm getting feedback from somewhere.
Oh, maybe when you moved your camera, you're picking up both.
Mic's off on that one. That's seems to be in here. Yes. Maybe it's just in the.
Let me check my settings, because if I have my sound up too high, I don't have it up high, but I'll turn it down a little bit lower because it might
I
be
don't
me.
have my mic on tonight, rubbing my beard. That was awful last night. I went back and heard
Okay.
that.
I got it turned down, so let's see if that helps.
All right. Yeah, I think that is a little bit of it. I was getting an awful hearing myself talk back to myself. All right. So let's see. Last time we were talking basically about some of the pitfalls and all that kind of fun stuff, but we didn't have time to get into the basics. And of course, the basics for guppies is they prefer hard water. That's no secret. Everybody knows that. What a lot of people don't realize is just how wide a range that guppies actually can adapt to. And there that darn fish tank went again. Well, for now, we're going to leave it there, and we might go figure out what's going on. But that's a Streamlab gremlin there. StreamYard, excuse me. Let's not get in trouble. So basically, like I say, we want to talk to is generally guppies are going to want to stay above 7 pH, preferably closer to around 8 pH. It really doesn't have to be a certain number. They're just really resilient to what you put them to. Of course, guppies, as most folks know, can go from freshwater all the way to saltwater. And so really almost any water will work as long as you have enough calcium in it for them, because live bears, they eat up calcium. When they're having babies and you're making 50 to 100 babies at a time, you got a lot of little backbones and spines and goodies to make. So they like lots of calcium in the water and other minerals available to them. We had talked a little bit, I think, last time about should you add salt, not add salt. I would refrain from adding salt in general, because that way you reserve that salt later for when you need it as a medicine. It gives it a much more therapeutic value to give a guppy a salt bath or something like that if it's not been living in salt. So that's one thing to consider. Or if you do go with salt, go with a nice low level that you can maintain. And for beginners, I would say a tablespoon for every 5 gallons is a good starting point if you want to start that way, especially if you're receiving fish. That's probably the most time when I would use it. And I would put in, like I say, about a tablespoon for every 5 gallons of just regular aquarium salt, and maybe a half teaspoon of Epsom salt. Generally, I wouldn't put that in unless you have a planted tank. That's something else that's going to use that up. And that's also a great trace mineral element for your plants and things like that. But that will just kind of sets up your water a little bit better for ionic exchange and things like that. A lot of folks don't realize too that for a lot of medications and things like that to work, especially when you're bringing guppies in, they're already stressed and everything. You don't want to get crazy with anything. You want to keep things as basic as possible. A lot of folks will use, like I say, a bare bottom tank, things like that. Redfish Bluefish did a thing a while back on setting up hospital tanks without a nitrogen cycle, and where you can actually set those up and using certain salts and minerals, get things set up and have a reaction going that basically does your cycle for you. And I'll have to look that up, Bob, and put that up. That was a good one for folks. But really with guppies, the biggest thing is you're going to lose guppies. When you get fresh guppies, we talked about that. Their water's going to be different. They're going to be in shock. They're going to be weak when you get them. So your best bet is to have the best water you can for them to start in and let them get going. I have found that, and people will shun me and say I'm bad, guppies can even do pretty well with a fresh tank. I don't recommend you start with a fresh tank, but if you have an emergency or something happens, somebody shows up at your door with a bag of guppies, you can get by with a lot of sins with guppies. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend it, but again, if you have any filter material, stuff like that, you can get a guppy tank started like that, and just don't overpopulate the tank. If you just, 10-gallon tank, don't put more than 3 or 4 guppies in it to get it cycled and started. And if you have live media from another filter, you can literally just shove that in there and put it in. I'd put 4 or 5 fish in the first day, maybe 4 or 5 fish in the next day for a 20-gallon tank. I wouldn't do a whole bunch. You're not going to drop 100 guppies, adult guppies in a tank on a fresh load like that. That will cause you problems, and it will cause you lots of disease. But
Do you see Bunny Viper's question there asking about plants with salt?
For most plants, if you stay below that tablespoon for 5 gallons, you're not going to have a huge problem. But there are a lot of plants that are going to be more susceptible, and they're not going to thrive in the salt. Like I say, I tend to do that more when I'm bringing fish into a quarantine or something like that, or a fresh new tank that I'm just starting, and I just want a little fudge factor for the fish. A lot of plants actually are going to do fine with that salt level. I had referenced the American Aquarium products, and they do talk about that when you go to their section, talking about water quality and salts and whether to run them, how much to run, that sort of thing. My experience has been that most of your general guppy grass is fine with it. Java moss generally is fine with it. You run into more problems when you get into some of your stem plants and things like that that are sensitive. I'm trying to think names. It's been so long. I don't even hardly do anything but just junk plants anymore. But all of your slow growing plants are going to do fine with it.
I had to Google what plants would be okay with my mud skippers in brackish water, and there are a lot of them, and I do have some plants living in there. So
yeah. Now they might shock a little bit if like if you're throwing salt in on them and they're not had salt before, that might shock them a little bit. You might get some yellowing of leaves, some die off, things like that, maybe some rot, but usually they'll adjust to it pretty well. In general, for guppies, the bad word is duckweed. I mean, it's great for your tanks. It lets you get away with a multitude of sins, but it's just a mess to deal with. But for a beginner who, again, you add a little bit of some sort of floating plant, any kind of, frog bed or anything like that on top of the water, that'll suck out nitrates quick. Any fast growing plant is your friend. And again, especially if you're like me, if you're getting into something where you're going to have a heavier load in your tank, you're going to have a lot of fish for a brief period of time. Duckweed and frog bit and water lettuce and things like that, they can just really save your behind on a heavy loaded tank. You just want to make sure you still have good aeration and things like that, because that's the biggest problem I run into, is not that I've got too many fish in for the tank for the food or for the cycle, but you run into not enough oxygen in the water. Especially when it gets warm outside, if you're doing ponds and things like that. But like I say, in general, I'm going to come over here to my chart so I don't spout too much. And again, these are in general. For most fish, I'm going to say for breeding, if you want to breed fast and hard, you're going to look at about 78 degrees for your water temperature. I would recommend going more 74 to 76 degrees. That works out to be room temperature in most houses. If you set your thermostat for 72, 73 degrees, somewhere in there, your floor tanks are going to be closer to that 72 degrees. Your higher you go up the wall, those upper tanks are going to be closer to that 76, maybe even as high as 78, depending on the airflow in your house, or if your basement, just depends where you're at. The fish will breed faster at the higher temperatures. They'll also have a shorter lifespan. Same thing with feeding. The more you feed them, the faster they're going to grow. But again, you're going to shorten their lifespan overall. The biggest thing to think of is when you're breeding guppies, like I said, we want to have lots of calcium in the water for the moms. And you can supplement that calcium by adding different sources to their food, or choosing to choose foods that are high in calcium. One thing that guppies love a lot of is spinach, things like that.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, just like you would for shrimp, just blanch it real quick, make sure there's nothing on it, no pesticides, things like that, and they'll tear at it for a while. Now they might not love it, but you can mix it into foods and things like that. But it's rich in a lot of the calcium, things like that they're going to need. Spirulina is another great source that's higher in calcium for the fish and other nutrients that are great for fish. It's important to feed your guppies fiber, and that's the biggest thing. People get all excited. I'm going to feed them bloodworms and all this other stuff. That's great and all, and they do need the protein for the first 2 months, especially. You want to really give them a high protein feed. I'd say 40% or better. I start most of my fish with the tetracolor granules or color flakes, and I put them in a pepper grinder. And so right from the babies, as soon as they're out, take a pepper grinder and it comes out, I mean, just super fine. Put a little twist on each tank, and that way, your babies are getting that food because most adults aren't going to see it. And the babies are going to come up and start feeding on it instantly. Now, be careful, because sometimes you do that, you get all the babies rushing to the top for that, and the adults go, hey, where's mine? So I always feed the adults first, usually on one side of the tank, and then just toss some of the powder in near the filter, and that's going to disperse it all across the tank for you really quickly. The thing is with the females too, like say they're putting out babies, they want that protein, and if you don't give them that higher protein, they're gonna start eating the babies. And as far as the males goes, like say for that first 2 months, you want the good fast growth on them, because males tend to develop slower. So you give them those high protein foods, and make sure you keep that vegetable fiber and stuff in there too. So foods high in spirulina, foods like krill, things like that. Another good one is brine shrimp. I mean, that's a standard. Hatch baby brine shrimp and feed brine shrimp every day, and that's great for them to develop. But again, the variety of the foods is what's gonna really come in and give you the best success. But just remember that they'll eat like a piranha, but they got to have that fiber, or they're going to get bound up, and you're going to start having bloat and some issues with them. And the other thing is because they eat so fast, you got to be careful too, that if you overfeed them, again, you're gonna stop them up. So I tend to feed one type of food one day and another type the other day. So I go and do the staple flakes, like I say, probably 3 or 4 times a week. And then on alternating days, I'll come in and do bloodworms and brine shrimp and things like that. I've been getting lazy with my brine shrimp. I've been going to frozen, but fresh is always better. They take them better. You get a variety of sizes, so even the smaller fish get to eat them more. So I would recommend hatching your own. They can get messy. They can get stinky. So just make sure you practice good hygiene on your brine hatchery, or you will have mama mad at you. Of course, my mama's from the Philippines, so it's not as bad. She's like, "Where's the shrimp paste?" But so like I say, that's the big thing. And like I say, we were talking about lower temperatures tend to grow them slower. Now, for competition guys, they want that high protein for the first 2 months. And when I say the first 2 months is if you keep feeding a male the high protein diet, after that first 2 months, they get to have what they call a barrel body. They get really big chested and not so much development in the tail. And so they start to lose the classic shapes that a lot of judges are looking for. And they tend to look almost like pregnant females. And so they can really kind of confuse people sometimes with their body development. And they're like, well, how come all my males are looking like this? Or, you know, how come it doesn't look quite right? And it's because you're overfeeding protein. And there again, the first 2 months, great. After that, you want to cut back, and I would go with more of around a 30% protein mix. And I mean, you can go over, but just make sure you give that extra fiber, plant-based. Guppies will eat most anything: spinach, cucumber, anything that you can think of you'd feed your shrimp, guppies will try on. Guppies will eat duckweed. So if they don't like it green so much as they prefer it after it's dead. So with evaporation, I end up with duckweed dried to the sides of the tanks.
Oh yeah.
And then just leave it there. And then when I fill it back up, it comes up, and then the guppies come up and they just start cleaning up all the dead, yellow duckweed off the side. So for vacationing, things like that, duckweed's great because it kind of gives them a food source. And of course, guppies will also graze on most other kind of algae and stuff. They're not crazy about hair algae, things like that. And hair algae can also tend to cause a lot of problems with them getting entrapped and tangled. And you'll find dead fish, especially your bigger fin varieties.
So do you separate the babies from the adults?
In the ones that I'm really working on hard, I will. but mostly what I'm doing is colonies, and then just pulling out what I think is the best examples and kind of
Yeah,
starting
I was
new
wondering because you were
colonies.
talking about feeding them higher protein until they get to a certain age. So
Yeah, yeah.
I was
Well,
thinking let's separate them somewhat.
yeah, that's more for the folks, like I say, who are looking to breed and want to keep body shapes and all that. Um, Now, what you can do for that again is doing that target feeding by grinding it up super small and things like that. You can kind of target feed a higher protein feed to those smaller babies by feeding more of the vegetable base proteins to them later for the larger fish and their larger granules. Now you'll still get little fish that latch onto those, and that's fine. It's not going to cause any problem. But that's the easiest way when you're doing a colony style to separate it, is just this food size. Again, bloodworms and stuff like that are great as well, because they're going to get some protein, but it's not near as much as what people think. People think, oh, bloodworms, that's meat. Well, it's really mostly juice. It's a very small percent. And a lot of people even say, why do you feed them? It's not worth it. Well, it is, because it does the casing gives the fiber with that. So even though you're only giving a little protein, you are giving fiber with it. Same thing. That's the best thing about doing the brine shrimp, is you get a lot of fiber in that exoskeleton, and as well as calcium and chitin and other things that are really good for the fish.
What about microworms? Do you ever feed them?
I have not done a lot of microworms. I'm too lazy to culture them. I always end up screwing them up. Sorry. I used to try to do stuff like that, and there for a while I was even doing flies and everything, trying to come up with different things to add to food. And I honestly got to where I was saying I'm getting just as good results by varying the store-bought foods as I am by going to all this trouble and extra work. Now, yes, if you want a certain color fish and you're striving for something, it might be worth it for you to go to that much trouble. Or if you've got a facility where you can do that easily, and a brain that will follow up with, hey, you can't leave those worms cultures in there indefinitely without checking them. You get some fun surprises when you forget about stuff like that.
A couple of questions. Oh, sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
A couple of questions in the chat. Scotty Aquati's asking, how about temperature, higher temperature, more males or females? And then I think BJ says, what about fresh peas for food?
Peas you can feed to them, especially if you're having like bloat issues and things like that. Peas I would save more as a medicine. They're great for fish that are constipated, that have bloat. For fish that have worms, that are having problems passing worms, some peas can be really good for that. But what I like to do is, by feeding the proper foods in the first place, I usually don't get to that place very often, so it's not a big issue for me. And a lot of people will complain, oh, it's bad to feed peas. But again, you got to think about what it is. Any medicine is going to be bad for a fish long term. So even feeding peas to a fish that necessarily wouldn't normally have that diet, yes, you're causing diarrhea. That's what you're trying to do. You want to loosen up the bowels of the fish and let them pass whatever the blockage is. So yes, you're feeding them something that's not good for them. But in the long term, that would be an issue. In the short term, it's not an issue. And if you want to put some in your food, great. If you're mixing your own food together, like Snello or any of those different foods for snails, guppies dig Snello. You can fix up like you would for your snails and put it in there, and you will find the guppies fight those snails for every last bite of that stuff.
Wow.
Most any of the gel type foods that you can get commercially now. Most
like
guppies.
The Soylent Green is really good.
Yeah, the guppies will love that stuff. Now, I will warn you, some of these foods that are stick on the glass kind of things, they're really great for taking pictures, and the guppies all turn circles around them, things like that. But they're not so good for your fish, because it's like any breed of animal. If you start feeding them in a localized spot like that, where everybody's got to come to that same spot for food, they're going to do damage to each other, and they're also going to be rubbing all over each other. So you're going to be crossing bacteria, you're going to be crossing viruses, you're going to be crossing several different things. Now, I'm not saying keep your fish separated and isolated like betas in their own tanks, But just keep in mind that when you create those feeding frenzies, you're going to cause damage to long fin fish. And I know a lot of folks keeping guppies, they want that big, beautiful fantail or whatever. And then they turn around and think, oh, I'm going to take a picture. So they start feeding these little, stick on foods and stuff. And again, you get some good pictures and stuff, but you also find after a while, you'll start getting splits in the fins and tails and things like that. I've even had some put each other's eyes out. They're that ferocious when they eat. So I've kind of gone away from things like that and tend to like foods that disperse, gives everybody a chance. And that's another thing too. When you're doing a community tank like that, you're going to get fish of all different age groups and abilities. And what you'll find is that if you don't give them varying foods, some on top, some in the middle, some on the bottom, some fish will start to not get their share, and you'll see quickly, you'll start getting bends in the spines. A lot of people mistake it for columnaris. It's not columnaris usually. A lot of times it's just old age, or that they're just not getting the nutrients they need anymore. The moms have given so many babies for so long that they just start to break down. And so a lot of fish, you get that big arch in their back and their tail looks like it's kind of hanging. It's usually just too much food, too high heat, and too many babies. And so, like I say, by keeping your tanks lower in that 74 to 76 degree range, I have a lot less issues with that. Now, earlier we talked about temperature and sexing and things like that. You will get a % change based on your temperature. So, and it's different by different varieties. I can't say it's going to be the same for every guppy. Some varieties, warmer temperatures give you more males, and some varieties, warmer temperatures give you less males. My experience in general is the warmer temperatures gives you better male success rate. Now, whether that gives you more males, I don't know, but it gives you a better survival rate on your males because they develop faster and have a better chance against the females. The other side of that is you'll get a fraction of a %. So like if you're getting 50% and 50% and you raise the temperature, you might get 51% and 49%. You're not going to get a huge change or difference. And that also goes for pH. Some folks have noticed that at different pHs, they'll get different offspring rates and different sex rates. I've not done any, definitive tests that can do that. There have been a few tests that you can find where they did scientific lab studies. And again, they're reporting fractions of % changes. And they did temperature, they did pH, they did water hardness and things like that, and it was all pretty much a wash overall. But in generally, I would say your higher temperatures, you might get more males, or at least a better success rate with them. Now, the other thing is if you separate the babies from the parents, you tend to get a higher male output. I have found in my experience.
That's interesting.
And there again, it's because those males are struggling to get, developed. The females are more likely to come along and predate them while they're, in with the other females. And now there are ratios where that changes. And we talk about how many males you should keep with females and things like that. Generally, in smaller groups, you want to keep 2 or 3 females for every male. And then as you get in larger groups, like say over 12 or more, that becomes less important. Because there's just enough fish. Males don't care if you're male or female. If you're close enough, they're going to show you their stuff and say, hey, look at me. They're very, very ready to go at any time, and they don't necessarily care that you got the right parts or not. So once you get enough of them together in a tank, and especially if you have, places to hide, fish cover, plant cover and stuff like that, that becomes less of an issue, and you can go closer to that even one-on-one kind of ratio. If you get off on that and you get too many males to females, they'll literally just pester them to death, and you'll start to notice that your females are struggling to stay alive. But it's the same way the other way. If you get too many females to the males, you'll find that the males are struggling because they won't stop. They'll literally dance themselves into oblivion trying to impress every female in the tank.
Oh,
So it's just, you've got to find a happy medium with them. And if you're going for breeding quality, like you see in the pictures everywhere, you need to pull them off and put them in separate tanks, like a couple of males to a 10-gallon tank. Because if you get any more than that, they'll start fighting with each other. And I'd probably go closer to 4, because you get just 2, they'll chase and fight each other too. So not necessarily fight as much as they just try to show off for each other, and they get confused over who's leading who. So
Stephanie says, how young will they start breeding?
It's different by the different strains, but in general, about I would say a month to 2 months, 6 weeks to 12 weeks. About the time they start to show color, you'll start to see it, and that's why you have to really separate them quick, because as soon as you can see the male and female, it's not long at all that gravid spot goes dark. And once it goes dark, you can pretty much bet something has hit it. Now, whether it's fertile or not, it's hard to tell. But if you can see a gravid spot on a female, there's a good chance she's already pregnant in a community tank.
Oh, wow.
And
Now-
is it true that guppies, and I could be wrong, I don't remember if I heard this, but like they can hold on to sperm for a long time?
Yes.
Okay.
In general, I would say up to 6 months. So there again, once they've been in a tank with males that are active, and they're active, you might put them off in a tank, and you might not even see anything. And then 4 or 5 months later, they might start popping. And now the other thing they can do is they can select their donor. So if they've mated with 2 or 3 guppies, they can select, okay, I'm going to choose from this deposit to father my guppies, or this
That is so
deposit.
interesting.
And that gets kind of trippy too. So, and that's another thing that surprises people. They might get guppies and then start breeding them and get 2 hatches that are perfectly fine, and then on the 3rd hatch suddenly there's a bad egg, and they're like, wait, I don't even have this kind of guppy, but they probably got hit in pet shop, somewhere along the way, or when they were being collected. I've even had stuff that I got from very reputable breeders. They accidentally mixed up their fry, and so
Oh,
what
wow. Yeah.
what I got looked great, and then as soon as they had babies, it was just a free for all of what is this? And then of course they're like, no, what are you talking about? No, that didn't happen. And then they're like, they call you back about a week or 2 later. Man, I've got this whole pond over here, and it's all messed up because something carried something over and dropped it. A bird or something got something in one of their outdoor ponds and dropped it in another pond, or they were moving fry and just did a senior moment, dropped the wrong fry in the wrong pond, So it happens even to the best of us, and that's why you always want a backup plan. Especially if you're doing rare breeds and things like that, have 2, 3, or 4 colonies going at the same time. So if catastrophe strikes one, you've got a backup. And don't keep them in the same room. Keep a smaller tank in another room completely, with different nets, different water sources, different buckets, and don't ever cross those 2. And that's just cheap insurance to make sure that you don't lose a strain. And that's just one of those things that you learn the hard way, so many times, especially if you start getting into trying to buy them and sell them and that sort of thing. Even like with my fish racks, where you have multiple racks above each other, get lids on those lower tanks, or it's eventually going to happen to you. The mystery fish is going to fly across the room and mate magically with the fish. It happens. They swear they get legs and crawl out at night, but gosh, what else can I think about? Fun stuff. We talked about water hardness, and now official numbers that most people recommend on that would be a DGH of 8 to 12 and a KH. DGH is your actual hardness. The KH is your buffering ability of your water, and that's going to be between 4 and 8 on that. I think it's measured in C, and I can't remember what C. We'll have to look that up. But anyway, those are basically your general ranges. And again, some of the guppies that I've had, like the Bentley Pascal guppies, they were in California, and they were putting those puppies in water that was less than 100 parts per million. which is really, really light for guppies. Most guppies now. This is a parts per million. It's a pin that you can buy or test kits. They'll tell you how many parts per million. This is total dissolved solids in your water, and a lot of people confuse this number with your hardness. It's not your hardness. It's going to give you an idea of what is dissolved in your water and what is only the items that are electronically conductive can it measure. So that's going to be most of your salts and things like that. So it's a general rule for guppies. You're probably looking to want 300 to 400 part per million range. If you're making your own water from scratch and you're adding your own, KH stuff like that, that's the part per million you're going to kind of target. Is that I would target about 350 to 400. I have tap water that comes out at about 300 as it is. And then after I filter it, I drop it down. It drops down to about 275 parts per million, somewhere in there. And then the other thing a part per million pin is really good for is it's kind of an indicator. So especially if you're just topping off your tanks and things like that and doing water changes, if you let it go too long, that number is going to come up. So if you've not been doing water changes and as ammonia and things like that build in the water, that those numbers are going to go up. So once your water gets to be 600, 700, 800 parts per million, that's telling you, hey, we got to do a water change and get this back down in that right range. And with like say if you're using tap water, that sort of thing, if you know what your source water is, say 300 parts per million, and you've got 700 parts per million or whatever, you can kind of extrapolate how much of a water change do I need to do to get that brought back down. With some fish and guppies, if it gets real bad, or if you have bad water for some reason, you have well water or something that's got contaminants, things like that, you can filter that out and then, like say, re-add it, get a GH KH additive like you would. Salty shrimp is what I use. When I want to start from scratch, I can start with DI water and make it exactly what I want it to be, So, and I saw that pop up. Tap is 430. Yeah, that's super hard. Now, and here's something I'm going to tell people too. When your water gets that hard and you start having evaporation, if you on my tank earlier, we had it up. It was you see the lime deposits on the back of my tank running down the back, things like that. You'll start to get buildup, especially if you're using hang-on back filters and things like that. You'll get buildup around that filter, around the top edge of it. And if you don't keep that clean, it will actually start wicking water over the back of your filter and onto your floor. And you'll, especially if you have a tank or something on a carpeted floor and you've had it there a long time and you think everything's hunky-dory, but if you notice all of a sudden that you're adding more water than normal, or your water level seems like it's going down and it doesn't make sense, or like you get, looks like white streaks on the back of your tank from under the top lip and rim, most likely the buildup on inside is just built up to the point that it's accessing a crack in your plastic, where it sits on the glass. And once it wicks the water to that crack will start wicking water up over the glass and out the outside of your tank. So sometimes when your tank's leaking water, it doesn't have a hole in it. It's just got too much calcium built up. And this can also happen with plants and things. If you've pulled a hair algae or something out of your tank and you let it hang over the top and don't get it pulled off and cleaned off, that water will wick up and over. Strings, you have drawstrings for filter bags, things like that, and you let them hang over the back of your hang on the back filter. Again, you'll get water leaks and stuff that way. So,
Can I make a comment about water really quick?
Sure.
So I have city water, and about 7 years ago when I was keeping fish, my water was like over 400 TDS. And if I use the API test kit, I know my GH was super hard, like 12 to 14. But anyway, long story short is it's a good idea to check your water every now and then if you're having city water or even well water, because now my water is half that TDS. Yeah. It's 220, 217 now, whereas 7 years ago it was like over 400.
Yeah.
The API test strips are a really good idea. Just if you're serious about keeping fish, especially certain types of fish that you're keeping and breeding, your water can change. And
Mhm.
so a TDS meter or the API test strips are always a good idea. Just to every once in a while check where your water's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be seasonal too, because I remember one
Yeah.
spring, usually my water is between, coming out of the tap is between 7.8 and 8. And I had, like, I'd done a big water change on one of my tanks, and the next morning I noticed that all my crypts were melting. Like,
Yeah.
totally melting into mush.
Yeah. Crips
And
are
I checked my tap water and it was coming out at 6.
Yeah, crips are one of those plants too. They're an early indicator of a lot of things, and that's another one of the plants too that doesn't like a lot of salt. We were talking earlier about.
All right.
But the seasonal thing is dead on. Anytime your water tables go up and down in your area, chances are your water company or supplier is going to be changing the chemical load on those, because most of those guys are getting their water from a well or a reservoir of some sort. And so as those water levels go up, it's introducing new contaminants and bacteria into the water. And so they have to shock treat that water to get those levels back down to safe levels. Especially if you're in like an arid region that's getting, like big rains that bring lots of water and then it all drains off, and then lots of water and it all drains off. Those guys really can get some big fluctuations. Usually in the spring and fall, of course, when we have more rain, at least in my area, that's the peak times. And especially if your water company's using chloramine, a lot of them will use chloramine because it's cheaper and more stable for them. Their goal, of course, is they want to make sure that when the water comes out of your tap, it stays above 7 pH, because anything below 6.5 pH will start to strip the copper from your pipes, and it'll make you deathly ill. So they go above and beyond to make sure that pH level coming out of your tap is usually around 8. And the easiest way for them to do that is chloramine, because one, they're going to get the benefit of the chlorine that comes out of it in the process to sterilize the water, but it's also going to be a buffer and hold that pH at that higher level. But as it breaks down, that pH can fall. And that's why a lot of times, especially with shrimp keepers, they'll say, pull your water from your tap and age it 24 hours. Put an aerator on it and aerate it, because that'll take out the chlorines and the most everything like that. But with the chloramine, it won't. But over time, as that chloramine breaks down, it'll introduce more chlorine into the water, and it'll also make that pH unstable. So a lot of times you'll get a big pH swing as well. pH that comes out might come out of your tap at 8.3. If you leave it overnight, it might be 7 tomorrow. Now, and again, it depends what your company's using. Some companies are using other chemicals that'll hold that pH. So like if you're trying to bring it down for shrimp and things like that, you just have to fight it and fight it and fight it. And you never will get it to come down until you exhaust whatever buffer they've put into the water. And so if you're having problems like that, I would suggest you actually contact your water company and say, hey, I'd like your latest copy of your compliance testing. And they'll tell you, on this date, we tested the water and this is what we found. And they'll give you very, very detailed information. And like she said, come back and check on that. I would check on it if you can every 3 to 6 months. Kind of gives you an idea. Check in the spring before the rains come. Check in the summer when you start to get the drought periods and things like that. And some of them will even tell you what they're adding and in what concentrations. So if you're targeting.
Yeah, I think these problems stem from a heavy snow melt that year.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you're in a mountainous region, so you're going to have that varying water table all the time. We're in, of course, Mississippi and Missouri rivers, so most all of our water sources are well driven, and our water's coming from bedrock, so we're getting super hard water all the time. And our water, because we have such a huge glacial, plateau area here, we're Great Plains. We have great sand beds and stuff and clay layers that filter the water, so we get really good water. Some of the other places not so much, and especially when you get close to these bigger cities, you get these huge amounts of drugs and other things that are getting into the water sources. And a lot of folks say, well, I'm on well water, I don't have to worry about any of that. If you're on well water, you have to worry about it twice as much. maybe 3 times as much.
Yeah,
Because with
because you're
well
getting,
water,
you're getting the agricultural chemicals
yeah,
getting dumped in the farmland and stuff.
yeah, and not as much as that per se, because that's pretty regular. As the well, my water tastes funny, so I'm going to throw these chlorine shock tabs down my well, and I'm going to put 4 times as much because by golly, I'm going to kick that problem this time. And then the guy next to him's well water starts to get that chemical, and then the guy next to him's well water starts to get that chemical. Or you get somebody who's doesn't give a crap and they're throwing dead animals in wells, things like that. You can get some horrible bacterial contaminations and stuff from well water, not from your well, but from your good neighbor who may or may not give a crap what's going on, or might not have his well secure, and they're having animals fall in on their own, or they're having bat infestations and bat guano, things like that. If their well has caved in on the side, and there's a host of things that can cause problems. But as that well water goes up and down again, you might have fine water, and then all of a sudden your well water goes up and there's a dead raccoon, and all of a sudden your pump is sucking carcass.
Yeah, I had some friends that moved into a farm and they had a artesian well underneath the house.
Mm-hmm.
And she had the water tested before she'd let anybody drink it, which was a good thing because it was contaminated. And they went down and looked, and the septic pipes were leaking.
Mm-hmm.
And running into the water, into the well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
My boy's in the Marine Corps, and he's at Camp Lejeune right now. And I'm sure every one of you goes, Camp Lejeune, they've got a water problem. Because everywhere you go and everything you turn on, and I probably get more because I do have a boy in the military, but I get inundated with hundreds and hundreds of ads. And what was happening there was their dry cleaning service on base was dumping their waste directly into the wastewater drains, the street sewer, and then it was leaching those chemicals. And the base was doing it too. They had jet fuel. They found all kinds of diesel fuel, all kinds of things in the base water there, and not only on base but the surrounding water table. And so people are right now making a small fortune because they knew about it in the 50s and they just decided not to tell anybody, just let it continue. So yeah, there's all kinds of nasty things that people don't think of that can get into your well water that you'd never even think of, industrial waste of every kind and stuff like that. Or the local carpet cleaner who decides he doesn't want to go pay to have his stuff properly dumped, and he goes down somebody's country gravel road and decides to dump it in the corner of their field or dump it down a farm drain, in somebody's field. Or you just never know what people are going to do these days. So, and I would predict that that's probably going to be a major form of attack if we ever are attacked on our soil. That's going to be the kind of thing folks do. So it just makes sense. You put that in your body, you put it in your children's body, you put your pets in it, keep an eye on things and make sure that it's safe. Any questions? I know we're kind of jumping around, and I apologize for that. Is there anything else? I get a lot of people too that talk about, well, what's the best size tank for guppies? And really, you can keep a guppy in any size tank you want as long as you realize what the guppy needs. It needs room to swim around. Guppies are a communal happy fish, so they prefer to be with somebody else.
About I was thinking about it when you were talking about calcium, because I've seen people have guppies and snails together in tanks, and it seems like the snails might compete too much for the calcium in the water.
I don't find that to be such of a problem as long as you're feeding them a quality food. What I do for snails is like I say, I would do like some sort of Snello and use Montrobarillite. I can't say the word. I have to look it up for you. But it's basically safety sorb. It's the base clay and safety sorb, and it's a silicon-based mineral clay. And it has lots of magnesium and calcium and other goodies in it. And you can buy it actually as a human food additive as well. and I'll have to look it up, and we'll have to see what the actual name of it is here. Let me see.
What about flow? How much flow do they need?
You really don't need a whole lot of flow, and I have a lot of tanks that don't even have air filters in them of any kind, sponges. They're just tanks with water in them and plants. The biggest thing you'll run into with flow issues is if you start getting into high temperature water. So if you've got a pond outside and you start getting water temperatures into the 80s, mid 80s, upper 90s. I've had fish tanks, outside ponds get as high as 98 degrees. The fish still survive. Now, what I recommend strongly in those conditions, if you've got that kind of direct heat, is that you shade those tanks. I usually cover half of a tub with wood planks to give it solid, complete darkness. And that gives the fish a better chance to go around. And actually, in those conditions, lower flow is usually better because it gives them a chance to go to the different layers in the water. If the water is still, the upper layer, of course, is going to be much warmer. And then the deeper you go, the cooler the water gets. So what you'll find is the fish dive down, especially if you've got good plant cover, water lilies, things like that. They'll dive down underneath in the hot of the day and stay at the bottom of the tank. Where you run into a problem there is if you don't have enough plants and stuff supplying oxygen and the heat gets too high, the oxygen level gets too low. So then some gentle movement actually is beneficial if you want to add a fountain feature or something like that so that water trickles in one side and it's taken out from the other. You can still keep that slower flow, and slower flow is going to be better for the finnage as far as breakage and things like that. But you're not going to be able to keep as many fish in the water. So if your goal is production, go on and aerate it and just do what you have to keep the water temperature lower. And things that will lower your water temperature are evaporation. So you can put in a waterfall feature, and that's going to lower your water temperature quite a bit. You can also blow fans across the top of the water, and that's going to keep you having better aeration and keep the surface water moving without agitating the lower level and upsetting that cooler sublevel. And now if you remember swimming in a pond when you're a kid, that sublevel is actually pretty deep. So you don't see a big temperature change till 2.5 foot deep. So this is going to be more for your big 110 gallon stock ponds, things like that you're getting at least 2 or 3 foot of water in. So smaller tubs, it's not going to be as applicable. With those smaller ponds, if you're doing like a 25 gallon little mineral cowlick pond or whatever, bucket pond, I call those, run an aerator and you should be okay. But yeah, that would be the biggest thing I can think of.
We got about 4 or 5 minutes left. It looks
Wow.
like.
Okay.
That one
Well, we might have to do a part 3, but
I'm down for that.
really, we've just got so many different things we can talk about, and I feel bad just rambling up here. But like I say, the biggest thing is almost anywhere in the United States, you can get guppy water. You can get, water that's going to be right for your guppies. If it's not, you can get what products you need to make it right for your guppies. Make sure that above all that you have calcium, that your pH is at least, I would say, 7.2 or above. Don't chase pH. If you can't get that without, just your basic setup, try something else and start another aquarium for your guppies. But I just find you'll kill yourself trying to change pH of the water with other than what I call a slow method. Slow method would be adding of calcium, adding of a substrate that'll hold a certain one. Like if you get African cichlid soil, things like that, you can get definitely that 8.2. And don't be afraid to go over. Guppies will do fine at 8.4. I've even had guppies as high as 8.6, but again, I had to add stuff to the water to get it that high. There was no benefit, so why bother? If you can just keep that 7.2 or higher, you can keep fish, and you can usually do it well. Most important of all is quality of food in gives quality of fish out. You can't feed garbage and expect to have beautiful fish. You can't put fish in a closet with 25 watt incandescent light and expect them to look like the gorgeous pictures you saw online. You
Can
can't.
I ask
Go ahead.
A quick question.
Sure.
Or maybe it'll have to be in part 3. Who's that there, Mike, rubbing your nose? What do you think about vitamins, like liquid things? I've been a big proponent of using some of the better tonics, for lack of a better word, for a long time, and I definitely see a difference.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks that have those. I've been experimenting with some. I got a bunch of stuff from Brightwell years ago for shrimp, and I've been experimenting with some of the stuff they had, because they have a lot of different additives for the water when it comes to that kind of thing. But the biggest one that I've seen added for guppies is vitamin B. And even folks will go get the vitamin B tablets, like the daily vitamin B tablet. And I'll have to look up a brand name for you or something like that. But a lot of folks add those. And what that does is it does a lot for fin breakage and things like that. So if you've got a guppy strain that you're getting a lot of fin splits and a lot of rod on, things like that, a lot of times they'll take the half of a B12 pill and they'll dissolve it in the brine shrimp hatchery, and then they'll hatch their brine shrimp in it and then feed the brine shrimp from the vitamin B12 water. And it doesn't hurt the shrimp, and it's a great way to get it to your guppy where you know your guppy's going to get it. Instead of just adding it to the water, you add it to the food that you know the guppy's going to chase after and get. And so you're basically gut loading your brine shrimp with vitamin B12, B6, B12. And like I say, it's, as far as I can tell, most folks have said most any of the daily human vitamin B pill will work. I think if you go to the American Aquarium Products, they actually touch on that too in their talk of things. I've heard some folks talk about other vitamins, but really the calcium in that are the big two. The other thing is your water having some sort of ionic ability for proper ion exchange, and that's where we talked last time about having safety sorb or some sort of clay-based soil is really good for maintaining a good ionic exchange in the water, which is very important for fish health, very important for medicines to work properly. A lot of times when fish are sick, it's not always a bug or a virus. It's sometimes that the water is incapable of completing the chemistry they need. And so by having good ion exchange and things like that, it makes trace elements and minerals available to the fish that otherwise were locked up and blocked from them before. So
that's why I always make the mixture of soil that I use. I always add kitty litter.
Yeah. Just make sure you're not adding anything that's got any scent, or also look careful that they don't have a coagulating compound added to them.
Yeah,
sometimes
I just get kitty litter that's pure clay with no additives.
Yeah, so some of the clay additives that are powdered form and stuff like that, they add an anti coagulating substance to them, and sometimes that can be detrimental, especially to shrimp, but fish as well. But gosh, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but we'll do the same thing as last time. If people come up with anything they want me to answer, they can pop it in the comments. That helps Bob get points with YouTube. The more comments we make back and forth there, the better it'll be for Bob and the gang.
Right.
I appreciate everybody having me again. It's been a lot of fun. Like I say, I've been kind of out of things for a while, and it's great to get back with folks and talk about it and share what I can. And I won't guarantee it's all 100% correct, but it's worked for me.
Yeah.
In your experience. And
in my experience, you can get by with this.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Thank you so much again, Tim.
All right.
And maybe we do need to do a third session. So.
Well, and maybe we can just kind of pick some things apart and try to target, more specialized nights. Like we can do one on ionic transfer of water. We can do one on one I'd really like to touch on some night is do filtration with folks so that you can get off the bottle and get off the chemicals. You don't have to add all those chemicals to get clean water. Carbon filters do amazing things, and you can basically get by. I pay about $25 a year for filters, and I could probably get by longer and less than that, but I just change them every year whether they need it or not.
Yeah.
Right. Those are some good topics.
Yeah.
I'll get with you, and we'll get a 3 or 4 together and get a third session set up, then awesome.
Perfect.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
panel. Thank
All right.
you again, Tim.
All right. Y'all have a great night.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great stream, guys.
Thank you, chat, for
Thanks, everybody.
participating, and thank you, mods, for the links and participating. And Danikin's links are there, so let's head over there.
Right
Good
on.
night.
Take care, everybody.
Good night.